Hi, Dr. Wood. This is Brenda Sampson, Psych 516, completing the midterm oral assignment. Starting with Chapter 1, how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? Give an example of an event and the resulting outcome. So we're going to start with Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18 points out the first organizational consultant, the Midianite priest Jethro. Now, Jethro was the father-in-law to Moses. He heard everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, how the Lord brought Moses out of Egypt. And Jethro consulted with Moses, noticing what he was doing was not good. Moses was actually carrying a burden for the Israelites and not releasing it at all, not giving it to God or anything, just holding on to it and not delegating authority or anything like that. So when Jethro consulted with Moses, he suggested that Moses be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. And all that's referenced in Exodus chapter 18, verse 17 through 19. So what Jethro was saying is take the disputes that the people give to you and give them to God. And so Jethro was teaching, Moses to do this. And so in respect, Moses taught the Israelites his decrees and instructions, showing them the way they are to live and behave. And that's reflected in Exodus chapter 18, verse 20. Jethro showed Moses the way to select the people, men who fear God. He said, select men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens of groups. So basically, Jethro was saying, divide them all up into groups, big groups, middle-sized groups, small groups, and put leaders in charge of them. Leaders that fear God, leaders that are trustworthy, that hate dishonest gain, and put them in charge of those groups. And that's reflected in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21. So additionally, from our text, Jex and Britt point out that organizational psychology is the scientific study of individual and group behavior. Now, with that definition, it caused me to reflect on Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And Micah chapter 6, verse 8 says, God has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. There's the definition of industrial and organizational psychology. So as we look into more of a modern era in the United States, Jackson Britt pointed out on page 12, during the early part of the 20th century, pioneers such as Hugo Munsterberg, Walter Dill Scott, and Walter Bingham applied psychology to the workplace. Now, these people were not psychologists, but they were learning how to apply it to the workplace. And during that same era, Europe was empirically discovering organizational psychology. Most of the topics that were addressed during that era were centered around skill acquisition, and personal selection. So it was centered around new hires. Now, there was a very little attention given to the organizational side of the field during that time. And other early non-psychologists, as Jex and Britt point out on page 15, were Max Weber, Frederick Engels, and Karl Marx. They believed in great detail the mental and physical health problems suffered by many workers in trade occupations. It caused problems that would be traced to physical conditions in the workplace and the design of work and social conditions presented in the workplace. And when I looked at that, I thought of the mining industry back then. And I thought that, there was a lot of physical health problems, a lot of mental challenges going on with the mines. Now, I don't have any documentation to back that up right now, but it was just my thought. The mining industry, could have been the forefront to, these non-psychologists trying to work out some solutions. Anyways, that was just my thought. So, despite the pioneers, the Hawthorne studies in the 1920s was the biggest influencer in the field. The Hawthorne studies helped with the growth of unions. And I think that's what made me think of the mining industry too. It was a collaborative effort between the Western Electric Company and a group of researchers from Harvard University between 1927 and 1932. The purpose was to investigate the impact of environmental factors such as illumination, wage incentives, and rest pauses, correlating it with employee productivity. Now, scientific management was the dominant school of managerial thought at that time. So the Hawthorne researchers found that productivity increased regardless of the changes in the level of illumination. So the performance patterns stayed the same. It wasn't affected by the lights being stronger in the office or dimmer in the office. And their hypothesis with the Hawthorne researchers, their hypothesis was that if the lights were brighter, it would increase employee productivity. That was their hypothesis. But the outcome of the research, their data showed and revealed that was not the case. The employee productivity had no change due to the illumination in the office. So this became the basis of what is known as the Hawthorne effect. The idea where people will respond favorably to any novel change in the work environment. The Hawthorne studies found that people respond differently to different styles of leadership. A lesser known outcome to the Hawthorne studies was that it represented one of the first attempts to provide an employee counseling program. So the Hawthorne study was a forerunner to our current employee assistance programs. That was interesting to me. Now let's move on from there. In World War II influenced the development of human relations. In the 1960s, the American Psychological Association recognized industrial and organizational psychology, making it an official part of psychology while the Vietnam War was being fought. And the 1980s to the 2000s, changes in the global economy and technology allow industrial and organizational psychology to influence work environments, creating better understanding of work and job. Pretty interesting. Today, industrial and organizational psychology is focusing on the baby boomer generation. They're focusing on work, safety, and emergency preparation after 911. They're focusing on retirement plans, and they're focusing on job insecurity due to recessive times. And right now we are definitely in some recessive times. So that is my answer for chapter 1. And let's move on to chapter 3. The question, describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is the program successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? Now, organizational socialization is defined as the process by which an individual makes the transition from outsider to organizational member. Socialization is a long-term process and begins with the newcomer transitioning from outside the organization to becoming an organizational member. Organizational psychology has tended to view socialization largely in terms of stages that newcomers pass through during the process of socialization. The stages are anticipatory socialization, encounter stage, change and acquisition stage, behavioral outcomes, and affective outcomes. In the anticipatory socialization stage, the individual in this stage is anticipating their experiences before they join their organization. So they're visualizing it, they're using their imagination to anticipate what it'll be like. And the second stage is encounter, where the newcomer begins to see the job or membership as it really is. The reality of the organization is known to the newcomer in this stage. And the third stage is change and acquisition. In this stage, the newcomer is performing and adjusting to the culture. The newcomer is firing on all cylinders, as Jackson Britt put it on page 81. When the third stage is reached, the employee has become accustomed to their new environment. The fourth stage is behavioral outcomes, and the fifth stage is affective outcomes. And the newcomer has become innovated in carrying out role responsibilities in those last two stages and is cooperating with other employees during the stages of behavioral outcomes and affective outcomes. So the most immediate outcomes of socialization is that the goal of the organization is for the newcomer having increased sense of embeddedness. This is a collection of forces that increase retention. The socialization process basically means that the employee has been integrated into the new organization successfully and is performing while being fulfilled in their work. Now, I am a newcomer at Liberty University. This is actually my very first block to my master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. I chose Liberty University because I felt the academic advisor familiarized me with the program and made me feel very comfortable and confident in my degree plan. Now, at Liberty University, the effort was made from my first phone call to introduce me to the system of study. The academic advisors spent time discussing the history of Liberty, the university's goals, the purpose of their program, and the mission to what they do. Now, I was set up in the system and I began getting emails and announcements. They were introducing me to various events at Liberty University. Accreditations were explained very well. It took me 1 full year to make my decision on where to complete my graduate degree program. Now, during the year, my first call was to Liberty University. Now, I interviewed 3 additional universities. All along during the entire year, Liberty University did not give up on me. An academic advisor reached out with a phone call periodically, and emails were sent once a month. This caused me to feel a part of the school while I was still in the anticipatory socialization stage. The excellency of the socialization process from academic advising caused me to choose Liberty University. And the academic advisors at Liberty University are excellent at their work. Once I met the encounter stage with Liberty University, they have been so helpful, causing me to feel a definite part of the organization. I'm very happy I chose Liberty University, and I feel a definite embeddedness now to the university. I'm really happy that I'm here. So that's my answer for chapter 3. And we are going to move on to Chapter 4. How can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? Research has shown that a reduction in work-family conflict is significant in creating a positive and effective work environment. The goal of any organization is to create work-life balance to avoid work-family conflict. When the organization is focused on a family supportive environment, when they treat everyone as a part of the family, communicating with diversity and inclusion in mind, it reduces work-family conflict. So when you feel that you're a part of the family, it's difficult to have work-family conflict at work, during your job and things. Family supportive organization perceptions have been shown to explain progressive differences in experienced work-family conflict, job attitudes, and turnover intentions above and beyond formal policies and a supportive supervisor. And that's referenced in Jex and Britt, our textbook. A mentorship program will gift the newcomer the ability to feel a part of the work family. It will also promote a family supportive environment. The family supportive environment, along with the supportive supervisor, will decrease turnover, increase job attitudes, lessen work-family conflict, and increase productivity. That's referenced in Jex and Britt, our textbook as well. So the social exchange strongly influences learning in the organization. That's referenced in another reference of mine, CORTE, from 2007. KORTE. Consequently, implementing work groups and team building exercises is a great way for the supervisor to oversee the success of social exchange. And the success of a reduction and prevention of work-family conflict begins at the top of the organization, with senior management and the CEO seeing the importance of the supervisor role in creating the family supportive environment. And I did place that in my group discussion as well, something to that effect, when we were discussing work-family conflict in our discussion forum. The current position I'm holding right now works to increase work-family conflict. They do not see the value of successful social exchange, and they do not utilize the supervisor role to implement a family supportive environment. Recently, one of our team members committed suicide, and I really believe it is because the supervisors do not see the value of creating job fulfillment. The company has an inclusion and diversity policy. However, the supervisors do not adhere to that policy with the entry-level workers, with the sales floor, I should say. They actually create hostility in the workplace instead of try to lessen it. I believe it is because the good sales employees, like myself, make more money than the supervisors. Therefore, jealousy runs rampant in the culture, causing a mean-spirited environment. And that's my discernment of my current work environment. My current environment is strengthening me to understand the value of preventing work-family conflict. So that is the answer to that question. Now we'll go on to Chapter 5. Imagine you have been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible? So, in developing an effective performance assessment, I would look at task-oriented behaviors first. Now, task-oriented behaviors are associated with in-role performance. Then I would look at interpersonal-oriented behaviors. And interpersonal-oriented behaviors are associated with extra-role performance. We'll get into that in more detail. Next, I would try and assess downtime behaviors through observation. And last, I would assess destructive hazardous behaviors through observation assignments via surveillance cameras or management supervision of the observation. So, one, task-oriented behaviors. This would be task-oriented behaviors such as all major tasks align with the job itself. In other words, and that's referenced by Jackson Britt in our textbook. In other words, the job-specific skill set, the technical aspect of the employee's job. If the employee was a pharmacist, for example, they need to know the different medications and the side effects to the medications. They need to know how to enter the medications in the system to account for the inventory as well. So that would be all under the task-oriented behaviors, and I would assess them on that. And then number 2 would be interpersonal-oriented behaviors that I would assess on. And again, let's go back a second. The task-oriented behaviors are also associated, like I shared earlier, with in-role performance, right? So I'd be assessing their in-role performance. Now, number 2, the interpersonal-oriented behaviors refers to non-technical abilities such as being able to communicate effectively. Interpersonal transactions that occur on the job are related to extra role performance. So in-role performance is the technical part of the job, right? Extra role performance is outside the technical part of the job. So, for example, taking the pharmacist example, the pharmacist needs to know how to communicate effectively with the employees and with the customers. The pharmacist needs to know how to relate and integrate within the work environment in a high level. Now, to measure the pharmacist, I should say, someone would have to be observing their behavior while the employee is working in their role. So to assess on a job performance, the extra role performance, or the interpersonal oriented behaviors, it would have to be an observation. And that can be done through surveillance cameras or through supervisory observation as well. Then the third step that I would look at would be downtime behaviors. Now, behaviors outside of the workplace that affect job performance, such as additional jobs, drugs, and or alcohol use, or even full-time school. That is one too. So for example, if the pharmacist is going to school outside of work, there you go. That's my example. If the pharmacist is going to school outside of work, they could make the employee too tired. It could make the employee too tired during work hours. So, and this is one of the most difficult things to measure. Downtime behaviors is one of the most difficult things to measure. So downtime behaviors would also be impactful for someone engaging in risk behaviors like drugs or alcohol behaviors, allowing those risk behaviors to bring about moodiness in the workplace. That's something that could injure job performance. So that needs to be assessed. And so downtime behaviors do injure job performance, but it is very difficult to observe them. But you could observe them with the delay in the task on the job as well. You might not be able to pinpoint it exactly, but you could pinpoint an aspect of downtime behaviors. Now, number 4 would be destructive hazardous behaviors that involve safety violations, sabotage, accidents that are caused by carelessness. For example, the pharmacist placing the wrong medication in the customer's pill bottle. That would be devastating, very devastating. Observing the employee taking risks would be an easier way to measure violations. So again, observing, and that's where surveillance cameras come in a great way for observing employee behaviors and destructive and hazardous behaviors. So that's how I would assess the job performance, do a performance assessment. I would assess it with those categories. That's my answer. Now, on Chapter 6, what are some possible common organizational constraints? How could they lead to counterproductive behaviors? Business constraints are the cog in the wheel of every organization, so to speak. Organizations must address and manage each constraint effectively to be effective. Here are some top 10 organizational constraints that the Center of Management and Organizational Effectiveness published in 2020 and featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, NBC News, Yahoo Finance, and the Huffington Post. I summarize them like this, and one doesn't weigh heavier than 10. I'm just summarizing what I researched. Number 1, resources. Number 2, organizational culture. Number 3, risk tolerance. Number 4, quality and consistency. Number 5, time. Number 6, regulatory compliance. Number 7, stakeholders' interests. Number 8, liquidity. Number 9, assets. And number 10, knowledge or skills of the employee related to communication, diplomacy, and relationship building. So those are the constraints. Now, every employee in the organization contributes or creates these constraints. If resources are unavailable to an employee, the employee may become frustrated and begin to work against a system or process. Low-level sabotage could be the counterproductive behavior. Intangible assets and the lack of liquidity of assets can be a constraint, leading the employees to sabotage or withdraw. Organizational culture can be the most consequential player in counterproductive behavior. A negative and abusive culture in a company can lead to person-based and situation-based counterproductive behavior. In my opinion, a negative and abusive culture of any organization can lead an employee down the road to trait anger. Now, according to Jex and Britt, trait anger is when an employee experiences anger at an emotional level. A poor culture in an organization can lead to stress and injustice, creating negative emotions to be displayed toward the organization. So change resistance is a common dilemma embedded in the culture of an organization. It leads to additional negative behavioral challenges such as withdrawal, sabotage, abuse, absenteeism, burnout, workplace discourtesy or incivility. Discourtesy, incivility, same thing. All business constraints lead to person-based and situation-based counterproductive work behaviors. Person-based counterproductive work behaviors, according to Jex and Britt, are conscientiousness, or the lack of it, trait anger, a lack of self-control, and narcissism. Now, situation-based counterproductive work behaviors, according to Jex and Britt, are norms, stressors, and injustice. Norms exist as people tend to behave according to the norms of the organization's culture. Stress creates emotional-based conflict. Injustice creates withdrawal and absenteeism. Moreover, counterproductive work behavior is a harmful enemy to any organization. It creates and delivers abusive supervision, employee theft, social undermining, aggressive behaviors like deviance and sabotage, drug and alcohol use, and even workplace violence. Likewise, the organization that I am currently employed with seems to support counterproductive work behaviors. The effect the noted constraints have on myself and the organization as a whole has led me to be absent and withdraw, as I've taken some vacation time because of it. My current employment, a call center environment, is the most negative culture that I've ever been associated with. The organization promotes and protects negativity, abusiveness, deviance and sabotage, social undermining, and abusive supervision, which I have been a part of at my organization. I have been the victim of this. It is a place where integrity and loyalty is not promoted. This culture has caused me to withdraw and be absent from my post as I am currently looking for the culture that I can thrive in. So I'm really fortunate to have this course and to be in this course while I'm in this kind of environment, because I'm able to apply what I've learned to the environment in a certain indirect way and really learn from it while I'm not in front of my book, my textbook. So anyways, that's my presentation, and thank you, Dr. Wood. Have a wonderful rest of your day.